Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment. As you can imagine, much of that is happening online these days, from the assessment itself all the way through to the facilitation. We're actually going to be talking today quite a bit about talent development, so that sort of fits in that category. I'm also the founder of HR Hot Seat, which is an inclusive mastermind community of over 2,600 HR professionals in 10 different licensed chapters around the country, coming together entirely for free, entirely online these days, to support one another, to serve one another, to solve common challenges, to connect with resources and vendors. The list goes on and on. It's all for free. Honestly, if you participate, you probably won't believe how much you're getting out of a free event. And that's our goal, is to pack so much value into a free event that you're kind of awestruck at the end of it. So you can find out more about that at hrhotseat.com. Tonight actually happens to be the 50th consecutive monthly event of HR Hot Seat Chicago. And so for free, you can attend that if you are available this evening. We would love to have you, whether you are an HR practitioner yourself, a service provider, a student, or someone even in job transition. Today you are here for a lunch date. I started these in April to remain inspired by people who inspire me. And I really needed that inspiration to do my best work. And so I kind of started these kind of selfishly, just to connect with people that I enjoy talking to. And I invited others along for the ride. And they started telling me that they were getting a lot out of these conversations as well. And so our audience has grown and the calendar has grown. And I've spoken to some fantastic people, including today's special guest, Dr. Esther Jackson from ATD. Esther, welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date.
Thank you, Eric. It is great to be here, joining you as well as your audience.
So right off the bat, I have to ask, are you going to prefer Esther or Dr. Jackson? What is your general, or Dr. Esther Jackson, or something else entirely that your family calls you that I've never heard before?
We can keep it simple, Eric, and go with Esther. I appreciate that.
All right, sounds good, Esther. I'll do that. You and I met initially at the ATD Chicagoland conference last year. And I learned that you're from the Detroit area. I am from the Detroit area. And so we had a great conversation about that. And I've had in the back of my mind ever since that I wanted to talk with you again and invite others into that conversation. So I came to you and said, all right, I'm doing these lunch dates. I choose my guests choose our topics. And you said, I want to talk about something that we'll call, is adaptability easier said than done? What is it about this particular topic that you are passionate about?
Well, Eric, I must admit, my passion for adaptability actually surfaced before we started encountering the situation and circumstances we are facing at this time. I had done an article last year with the TD magazine on adaptability. And that was as a result of my interest in emotional intelligence. And from there, seeing that there was so little out there about adaptability, about the adaptability quotient, it just sparked a stronger interest where that became a focus that kind of consumed me. And now it's like, oh my goodness, look how much we need adaptability.
Right. You mentioned emotional intelligence, which is something that I'm certainly interested in having to do with DISC. You may or may not know this, but HR Hot Seat Chicago has partnered here locally with the Association of Change Management Professionals, their Midwest chapter. And in talking with their president, Stephanie Waite, about change management, we've had so many interesting conversations about how we're all change managers, that we're all managing change in some way. And some of us consider ourselves to be better at it than others. Some of us consider ourselves to be more adaptable than others. Do you agree with that right off the bat, that in some way we are all managing change, and in that sense, kind of almost have to be adaptable to some extent?
I definitely agree wholeheartedly, Eric. And it's interesting that you would ask that question, because typically in the presentations that I do for adaptability, One thing I point out is it is distinguished from change management. When we talk about adaptability versus change management, typically we're talking about with adaptability, how you are able to adjust and overcome changes that are unplanned, new circumstances, new conditions that were unexpected. Whereas change management, you're typically initiating some type of effort, some type of process, some type of program, or some type of initiative. And then you want to monitor the progress with communication and other things to ensure the positive outcome and the intended goal.
And maybe shepherding other people through that change. So not only responding to it yourself, but then also ensuring that other people have the tools and the resources to manage it themselves.
Of course, and that all plays into the definition for change management.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank you. I love that you started right off the bat distinguishing between those terms, because I love, sometimes I think I make the mistake of just assuming that everybody's on the same page with the terms that we're using. For example, you mentioned AQ, adaptability quotient. We've heard of EQ, emotional intelligence. We've heard about, there's some various others out there. AQ is this adaptability quotient or adaptability intelligence, I'm assuming. What is your history with that term specifically? Where did you first learn about AQ?
Good question. I was first introduced to AQ when I did some research and came across an individual named Paul Stoltz. And he is one who is characterized as the author of what is called the adversity quotient, which I have come to use affectionately more so as the adaptability quotient. Okay. Pretty much one and the same. Your ability to overcome and adjust to changes, to adversity. You're talking about the same thing with adversity quotient. And what I love about how he approached it in his book, which is the adversity quotient at work, he also gets into various models. And so that is something that he put out there in 97, which was shortly after EQ came onto the scene for us by Daniel Goleman.
Excellent. Oh, I love it. So you're already coming out with the resources. And for everyone who's attending today, I will follow up in an email to all of you with links to these resources. So if you didn't catch a name, maybe Esther can put something in the chat area. She can type in a name if she has the ability. If not, we will follow up via email with links to some of these things that she's mentioning. I want to say, in looking at the chat, that we have people chiming in from South Dakota. We have Chicago, Albany, New York, Toledo, Ohio, Middleton, Wisconsin, Detroit. Allison is calling in from the Detroit area. So Esther, you're drawing quite a crowd.
Glad to hear it.
So before we get any further, would love to launch a quick poll that I put together. And the poll asks two questions. Number one, how adaptable do you consider yourself to be when it comes to responding to change in your own environment? And then you see some responses there. And then two, how adaptable do you consider your organization to be when it comes to responding to the need for evolving talent development practices? So part of our conversation today is going to be specific to talent development, given the work that Esther does and the association she represents. So as people are responding to that, Esther, I'd love to start out with, or continue with, the challenges that you see people facing related to adaptability, specifically when it comes to talent development. You are a national advisor for chapters for Association for Talent Development. You have done a lot of work in this area. What are some of the challenges that you see people face specifically when it comes to talent development?
Sure. One would definitely be adjusting to the digital platforms out there, making selections and trying to come up with a selection that fits the needs of your organization, that fits the needs of your audience, that targets the resources that you are able to launch and make available to your intended audience and meet those organizational goals. As we know with talent development, it's geared to develop the skills, develop the knowledge that's needed for a workforce to perform in alignment with the organizational goals, those intended business outcomes. And so right now, there is the demand for that quick turnaround for talent development professionals to be able to adjust to that, as well as, hey, take an assessment of what you have to see where things can be leveraged.
You mean there isn't a one-size-fits-all platform that's going to work for every organization out there?
You know what, Eric? As soon as someone comes up with that $1 million winner, they will be on to something. But until then, I haven't seen it yet.
And I knew we would touch on technology, and it's no surprise that it showed up early on in this conversation. I think that is whether or not you're in talent development, and we have people who are sort of HR practitioners broadly defined. We'll have leaders at all levels of the organization. We'll have people that are just happened upon this link and decided to join it because you were a guest. I think we're all responding in some way to technology in ways that maybe we hadn't before. My guess is there are some folks that had this figured out years ago and have been sitting in front of their computer screens for forever. But for most of us, wouldn't you agree? I think we're really just discovering now the power and the value behind some of these technologies, especially in terms of developing our employees.
Definitely agree. A couple of examples that come to mind in that regard. One, I had a recent client project where, in light of the current circumstances, they needed us to assist them with bringing their talent development, their instructors, up to speed with how to go from that face-to-face instructor-led classroom setting to now you have to present virtually. So walking them through, hey guys, here is a VILT, virtual instructor-led training manual for you, making that general, and then going through with each one to customize each one of their topics and walk them through some of the tools, some of the interactions that they could use in their training was really interesting. And so that was a very quick response, as well as very appropriate in their reaction on their end. And another example with my own local chapter, ATD Detroit, we started last year going, for the most part with our programs, conducting webinars. And then we decided for this year, we wanted to lighten up on the webinars and go more so with the live programs. Well, COVID said otherwise. So it was really great that we had already gotten our feet wet with predominantly, the web-based types of programs being launched for most of the year last year. So that was a leg up for us that helped out tremendously. Whereas I know there are quite a few other ATD chapters that had to kind of scamper around a bit and put things together and come up with that plan to make it happen without having their feet wet in that domain.
I just think that shows how proactive and strategic you are in general in what you do, that maybe you couldn't foresee COVID, but you were like, hey, we're moving in this direction. Like, this is something that we need to do more of. And it ended up working to your advantage. I appreciate that you threw out an acronym there, VILT, and then you explained what that means. Could you mention that one more time for those of us who are not familiar with that particular acronym?
Of course. Instructor-led training is how we reference ILT, or I should say vice versa. When we are talking about ILT, we're talking about instructor-led training, which is typically referencing that live face-to-face interaction with an instructor, a facilitator, a presenter, and their audience for whatever they are training or trying to teach. Whereas when we add that V and call it VILT, we're talking about the virtual domain. So that's still pretty much something that's referencing something that's taking place in real time. So we're dealing with that synchronous learning going on, and the instructor or instructors are remote. And so the VILT is something that's becoming more popular, and it's distinguished from like your typical webinar or other types of learning events in that there may be more dialogue, more interaction, more engagement between the instructor and the participants or attendees, whereas your webinar tends to be more along the one-sided type of interaction that's going on.
That's really helpful. Thank you for that. And I want to go back to something that I think you were alluding to just a moment ago. And these lunch dates are all about vulnerability, and I am not exempt. I have to admit to things that I don't want to have to admit to along the way as well. And one of those things recently has been, well, because I've gotten comfortable facilitating learning in person, I must be a good virtual facilitator. Esther, that is not the case. I will tell you that I was hoping to take this skill set from over here and apply it over here, and it has not worked that way. I mean, talk about having to be adaptable. Um, I have struggled with that personally. This is kind of a softball question, but does this in-person skill set translate easily into this virtual skill set?
Eric, I cannot count how many times I've encountered that question, encountered articles addressing that. No, there is not a direct correlation. There is not a direct transfer. There are certain behaviors that definitely warrant themselves to be assistive and helpful. And some of those behaviors will be things like monitoring your audience, paying attention to some of those verbal cues as well as the nonverbal cues of your audience, having that empowerment and having that real strong foundation with understanding your topic. Those are essentials. Those are basics that are definitely going to transfer. And when we look at the other side of that, when we talk about virtual, we're talking about picking up on other things and having that command of the platform. How well do you know the equipment, the functionality, the platform that you're using, the features? That's something I still need to work on depending on what platform that I am utilizing. Other things that come into play, being able to navigate what you're doing, how you are carrying about your particular training and staying on time with tasks. So time on task, as well as gauging that, as well as are you diversifying your interactions with the learner? Is it more than just chat? Have you set those ground rules at the beginning as you so graciously did? Here are some expectations. You set them up at the beginning, so they would understand, hey, we like you to engage in the chat. Let us know. You're going to receive some resources later on. So a lot of those come into play and are very instrumental in helping the facilitator. And one I would say that's definitely one that's pertinent is being able to recognize when you have objectives you need to meet for that learning event. How are you aligning them and matching them up to the interactions you include in your learning event?
Yeah, it's that you're being intentional and strategic rather than just kind of going with things the way that you've always done it. Speaking of engaging people in different ways, most people should see your reactions button. Give us a thumbs up if you like what you're hearing so far. That's one of the benefits of technology. Allison, Randall, I see a few coming up here. That's one of the benefits of technology is, you can provide, your feedback along the way in a way that won't be disruptive. And so I, as the facilitator, and then Esther as the guest, can see that people are, whether or not what we're saying is resonating with folks. I think there are options I could even make available that even suggest like, go slower or go faster. So Zoom is really helpful for a lot of that. I will say along those lines that one of the big learning lessons for me has been not only that there's a different skill set involved, and let me know what you think about this, Esther, but that sometimes it's about, okay, how in Zoom can I replicate what I did in person in a way that's going to make sense? So if I did breakout conversations in person, which I do for my DISC workshops, what technology will allow me to do more breakout intimate conversations? Zoom allows that. So it's sort of replicating what I did in person, but not get so focused on replicating what I did in person that I lose sight of the possibility that something might need to change. That this thing that I did in person is just not going to work anymore. Do you see that as well, that people just come in with this assumption, not only that skill sets are going to translate, but that just their strategies in general need to be replicated or mimicked in some way with the technology available?
Yes, I encountered something definitely in that regard with one topic I was assisting with, and that was it was dealing with difficult conversations, and it touched on handling conflict. And so it was the combination of the two. And we were trying to figure out how to approach it for this particular facilitator, where she could do something that would mimic how she would do her scenarios.
Mhm.
And we came up with, hey, let's figure something out with these breakout rooms. So we decided to change up scenarios and assign the breakout rooms and just give people different versions of the breakout rooms and have her producer or co-facilitator to assist by monitoring the breakout rooms. Because the key with the breakout rooms is it's a very good idea to have more than one person involved if you're going to get into breakout rooms. Yeah. But again, we're talking about really having that sound, solid grasp of the technology, because with those breakout rooms, there are things like, do you need to have the individuals designated to the breakout rooms beforehand? Have you given them the plan or the setup for how things are going to happen when it's time to go in, when it's time to come back out and return to the main group? And then what's going to happen while they're there? Is there something they need to see? Will you have a whiteboard? Are you going to distribute something before they go in or while they're in a breakout room? And then maybe, are you going to do some annotation, use other features while they're in a breakout room? So we're talking about a lot of features that could really work to your advantage to maybe mimic or even create a more engaging or just as engaging experience as they would have live. But it's a matter of really utilizing those features and like you said, being able to apply when needed at the right time for the right thing.
I think if people show up to my HR Hot Seat event tonight, they'll be able to sit down and make a list primarily in two categories. One, the areas in which Erich has adapted and he's learned some new things that he's proud of putting into play. And a list of things that Erich is holding on to as stubbornly as he possibly can. Because they worked face to face, and darn it, he's going to make them work virtually, and it's, I guess the greater point to be made there is, regardless of technology and adaptability and a lot of these other things that we're talking about, personality styles are still at play. Right? And so some of us can embrace those personality styles that come naturally to us and use those to our advantage when it comes to embracing change and being adaptable. And others are going to kind of push back and say, you know what, things have worked this way before and they should work this way going forward. And, it ends up being a challenge and an obstacle.
Well, Erich, that is a really interesting point, and it's so targeted and appropriate, because I'm not sure if you're going to cover it later, so forgive me for skipping ahead. But when we talk about skills related to adaptability, the fear that you just mentioned, or the lack of willingness to let things go and to be adjustable or flexible to what fits the situation and to take on new things, that's something that shows adaptability. Or, you know what, I haven't done this before. I've never used this equipment before. Oh my gosh, how am I going to handle this? Let me just stick with what I know. That's someone who's, pushing back from taking a risk. Risk taking is one of the qualities of an adaptable person. Yeah. So that's something you really want to be conscious of and think about. What types of skills related to adaptability do I exhibit? What are my habits, my tendencies that maybe don't, represent themselves well for an adaptable person?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I feel like we could talk all afternoon just about that particular point alone, because that really resonates with me. You talked about later. There's only 5 minutes of later, if you can believe it or not. So there isn't too much later to come. So we got to get moving here. But I appreciate Alyssa including in the chat that she thinks that there's a difference in terms of terminology between being adaptive and being adaptable. As succinctly as you can, Esther, do you see a difference as well between those two words?
I would agree with her, yes.
Yeah?
Because, for one, when we talk, you said adaptable and adaptive. Or did you say adaptability?
Adaptive, okay. And adaptable. Those are two words that she sees the difference between. And yeah.
Great. I'm just making sure we're talking about two adjectives.
Yes, we are. Thanks for clarifying.
Right. So adaptable, I'm thinking, is in reference to being able to demonstrate the capability, having the potential, whereas adaptive is more reflective of something that may be adjusted or something that's characteristic of maybe an environment or a setting or a situation more so. And it's more reflective in a sense of adaptive being in terms of when it's inflicted upon, not necessarily with adaptable where it's something I have the potential and I can take on certain opportunities, certain learnings to help me develop in that area.
Adaptive is more that you've been put into the position to have to adapt.
And possibly,
Yeah.
where with adaptive dealing more, I would say, yes, in a reactive mode, but more so it caters to a given situation.
Yeah.
A given domain, because we hear a lot about adaptive learning, and it speaks to the situation, speaks to what's needed for maybe a given task, a given job, and so on. But that's definitely something that I would look more into researching, because it's a very good point, adaptable versus adaptive. I don't consider myself to be an expert in distinguishing between those two, but that's where I am now. And that's definitely food for thought for me to go and look into more after this session.
Yeah, that's good. That's very helpful. Thanks for the question, Alyssa. And Mike Raven has chimed in here in the chat area, and I know he's an expert in this field as well, that he's saying that one is more reactive and another one is more proactive and intentional. So I think that's a great way to look at it, Mike. Thank you for chiming in there. Well, we are already just about at 12:30, Esther, and I think you've shared some great challenges. You've even shared a few good tips along the way. Is there one succinct tip that you can share for people who, as soon as this conversation ends, want to move in the direction of being more adaptable?
Yes, definitely. One that I really love and I really refer back to very often is Talent Smart. This particular organization is by Dr. Travis Bradberry, and he's the author of Emotional Intelligence 2.0, that book. But his organization, Talent Smart, they have awesome articles that focus on not just emotional intelligence, but also deal with resilience and adaptability. And I find a lot of excellent resources there, especially when it comes to applying a model of adaptability that I created, which is ADAPT. A for assess and adapt, D for determine and adapt, A for analyze, the P is for preparing an action plan, and then the T for taking action. And that's actually what I touched on and explained in my adaptability article for the TD magazine. Adapt, right. Assess, determine, analyze, prepare, and take action.
Thank you for those resources. We'll pass them along in the email. You'll see that I shared the results of the survey that we did earlier, or the poll that we did earlier, saying that most people are, feel that they are somewhat adaptable, and then the majority of people say their organizations are either somewhat or not at all adaptable when it comes to talent development. No one said very adaptable. So I think that there's work to be done all around, not only on us as individuals, but on our organization, so that we can all be more successful and productive at the end of the day. So thanks for everyone who participated in that poll. Esther, this has been great. I wish we had at least twice as much time. Where can people find you online if they want to follow up with you?
Sure. I would love to have folks reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the most active area where I am engaged, and you can find me under Dr. Esther Jackson. Love to hear your thoughts, chime in, comment on today's session, how much you love Erich, how much you love adaptability, how much you love lunch dates, all of that.
Excellent. Speaking of loving lunch dates, now here's me being adaptable. Look at this. I don't know if people are going to see or if this is even going to work. Look at that fanciness. Coming up, if you go back to harmonyinsights.com/lunch dates, first of all, I hope you'll share this URL on LinkedIn especially. It helps us spread the word about what we do. Tomorrow, I'm hosting a conversation with anyone who is a facilitator of DISC, the DISC personality assessment, to talk about how we can facilitate it virtually more effectively and successfully than perhaps we have in the past. And so we're going to share some best practices for virtual DISC facilitation. Coming up next Thursday, I'm going to be talking with Terry Bean, who's in your area, Esther, on the value and power of networking, nurturing your network and your relationships. This guy is really engaging, so I hope people show up for that. And then coming up thereafter, I'm going to be speaking with Jay Polacki, who I know has been a guest on the HR Social Hour half-hour podcast recently, and we have Wendy Daly with us today. I'm speaking with Karen Allen, who is a TEDx speaker. She has a TEDx talk that's just fantastic. Courtney Templin, who's the president of JB Training on the power of HR community. And then Katie Lopez to talk about HR anthropology, how we can inform our efforts around inclusion by better understanding various cultures and how people prefer to communicate. And that is going to be such an interesting conversation. That is all at harmonyinsights.com/lunchdates, which you see in this fancy little thing that I came up with at the bottom of my screen. I'm going to brag about that until the cows come home. Esther, this has been a fantastic conversation. If people need to leave now, they can do so with our blessing to go about their day, hopefully inspired to do their best work in a way that they wouldn't have been otherwise. If you want to stay around, Esther has graciously agreed to stay around for a few minutes to hear your contributions and answer any questions you may have. But in the meantime, Esther, let me just reiterate, this has been a long time coming, and I really appreciate you'd be willing to spend this time with us today.
Thanks for having me, Eric. I love the engaging conversation, the dialogue that has been going on, and contributions in the chat. I, gravitate to opportunities to talk about adaptability, especially with what we are seeing out there and what we have the potential to do when we put it to work.